All right, thanks for joining us today in learning to assess an individual's AT or assistive technology needs. My name is Laura Parks, and we also have Brandon Welch with us, and he's with Tasc now as well. He's our new AT specialist, and if you have any questions, he's going to help facilitate that today. So feel free to type in the questions in the question box, and we'll try to answer them as we're going along. So we are with Tasc, that is Technology Assistance for Special Consumers, a program of United Cerebral Palsy, and we are collaborating with STAR, which is the statewide assistive technology resource, to provide assistive technology trainings throughout the state. We also have all of our lending library items online at al.atforall.com, so you can see our lending library and feel free to borrow anything that you may need that will help you when you're providing some assessments. Everyone is muted for this webinar, but if you have a specific question, just feel free to ask it in the question section, and we'll do our best to answer it during the presentation. So since we're talking about assistive technology, I always look at assistive technology as a tool. So let's think about tools in general. So if I was to go to my garage and I took a look and I saw all of these tools, so maybe I have a hammer or a pair of pliers or a screwdriver or a saw. Well, I see all these tools and I say, wow, I'm going to build a birdhouse. Of course I don't. I always start with what's the end goal. So if my end goal is to build a birdhouse, then I go and pick the tools. I can't just look at a bunch of tools and say this is what I'm going to make because I have these tools. And the other thing to think about when we're thinking about tools is what is the function of the tool. So if I use the example of a birdhouse and I'm going to build a birdhouse, well, one of the things I may need to be able to do is cut wood. So let's think about all the tools that can cut. Maybe a saw, maybe an axe, a pair of scissors. Even toenail clippers cut, right? Well, of course, if I'm building a birdhouse, not all of these tools are going to work. So not only do I need to know what I need to be able to do, I have to understand the scope or the sequence of what I need to do. If I'm using a very soft wood, let's say like a balsa wood or a very light wood to build that birdhouse, then a saw like a jigsaw may be too much. Maybe just a little handheld saw would work for me. And if I think about as well using tools, what if I tried to cut a birdhouse using an axe? There's a good chance I'm going to hurt myself because I'm cutting smaller pieces. So it's really important that we think about what is the scope of the project as well, not simply just what do I need the tool to be able to do. So before we go to our assistive technology tool chest, there are some questions we need to answer or identify. First, who is the tool user? So let's think about our example. I can tell you I can use a saw just fine. I can use scissors, I can use toenail clippers. But don't give me a chainsaw because I am an inexperienced user of using big power tools like that. If I try to use a chainsaw, there's a good chance I'm going to get hurt or do some damage that I didn't intend to do. So it's important when we think about assistive technology and the tools that we're going to be using with our students, what are their skills? And then, what are they trying to use the tool to do? So my example was using it to build a birdhouse. Well, some of those tools would work, but if I'm cutting down a tree, I can't use nail clippers to do that. So it's really important to understand, well, what are we trying to do with the tools? And then I kind of skipped those questions. The second one was, where are they trying to use the tools? So if I'm working outside, a chainsaw would be appropriate. If I'm working inside, a saw might be more appropriate. So even for our students, we have to think about that. If they're in a general education classroom or a self-contained classroom, or if they're transitioning and doing employment skills, how are they going to be able to use those tools in those environments? And then I also have to look at what is the function and the characteristics of the tools you need. So if I was working with a coworker and I said, I need a tool to cut wood, and it's a very thin wood, and I need to cut a small shape, then they would know, okay, don't grab the jigsaw, but maybe just a little handsaw, or maybe something even smaller. So it's important to understand what is the function and the characteristics of the tools you need. So even with the example, as you can see, with hand tools or power tools to build something, it's the same with assistive technology tools. We kind of have to think about who is the tool user, where are they trying to use the tools, what are they trying to do, and then what is the function and the characteristics of the tools you need. And this is the whole purpose of an assessment. So today when we're talking about assessment, these are the questions we're going to try to answer when we're doing an assessment, because we want to make sure we find the right tool for the students. Now, in your handout, I've given you some information about assistive technology and the definition of assistive technology as it's defined by IDEA. And so part of the IDEA definition of assistive technology includes the evaluation of the needs of such a child, including the functional evaluation of the child in the child's customary environment. So evaluation is part of assistive technology services under IDEA. But the law does not require an assessment for every child with an IEP. What the law requires is a consideration. And there's been some confusion in the difference between a consideration and an assessment. Now, startraining.org, when you visit our website, and I want to show you that real fast, when you visit startraining.org, you will see a section called Recorded Webinars. When you click there, we already have a webinar specifically on AT in the IEP, considering AT. Now, we did this about a year ago, but it's still applicable when we worked with ADAP, the Alabama Disability Advocacy Program, to come up with what does a consideration look like when doing assistive technology in the IEP process. So I would encourage you to visit that webinar and watch it. It's about an hour long, and you'll really understand what a good consideration is needed. And that is required by the IEP for every student with a disability, not just for students with significant disabilities. An AT assessment is not required for every child with an IEP. So I'll say that one more time. Just because a child has an IEP does not mean we have to have an assessment for assistive technology. It does mean we have to have a consideration, but that's a little bit different than assessment. And in your handout, I've also provided this chart because it kind of helps me visualize the difference. A consideration and an assessment have some similarities. They're both a collaborative decision-making process. So we have the IEP team, and maybe the special ed teacher, and maybe the speech therapist, and maybe the occupational therapist, and maybe the parents. Everyone is on a team making the collaborative decision process. That's both for consideration and assessment. They're also based on the goals and objectives and access. So if the student is in 4th grade and their goal is to be able to read their science text, that was important to know both in consideration and when doing an AT assessment. They're both based on data. And we're going to talk about different assessment methods today, but we're not talking about a standardized assessment. It's not, we're not going to complete a standardized test and come up with a score as far as assistive technology means. But we can take data as far as observations or use IQ testing or some other data to help us make good decisions and consider and assess based on that data. We're also going to explore a range of AT devices, services, and supports when we're considering and assessing for assistive technology. That doesn't mean we can just go to our closet and say, I have this tool, it will work for the student. No, it's really identifying, what is it that the student might need? Maybe we need to purchase something. Maybe there's something free. Maybe we need to borrow something from Tasc Lending Library. So we really want to explore the range of things available. And finally, in consideration and assessment, it's both a continuous process. Sometimes assessments are seen as they're done and finished, we can check a box and put it away. Well, that's not what they're supposed to be intended for. It's a continuous process because guess what? Technology is constantly changing. Students change as far as their learning styles. Teachers change. The student may have to change classes. They may be learning a new curriculum. With the new Common Core coming in, that has been concerns as far as how a student's going to access their curriculum. So the assessment and the consideration of assistive technology needs to be continuous. So we have the annual IEP meeting. Of course, we consider it every single time we have the IEP meeting, but it may also be something that when a problem arises, we address it and we fix the problem. Now, there are some differences between consideration and assessment, so let's take a look at those. A consideration is for all individuals, regardless of severity of disabilities. Just because you have a student with an IEP that maybe is receiving services under other help impaired because they have ADHD does not mean that you don't have to consider assistive technology for them. You do. So assistive technology has to be considered for all individuals. You also have to document that consideration, and this has been a question that's come up several times in conferences. Well, how do you document the consideration? Well, you have the profile page of the IEP. That's a great point to say that. You know, the IEP team considered assistive technology, and we discussed how there's computers in the classroom, and the student can use the computer to access it. I love the new IEP forms. I kind of call it a cheat sheet where you have your service page. That's where you document it as well, whether assistive technology is needed or not needed. But remember, we're doing this for all students because a consideration has to be done for all students with IEPs. Now, when we think about the assessment, what makes it different from consideration is there needs to be a procedure for the referral and scheduling of assessments. So if the school has a team that's doing the AT assessments, how is it that that team is alerted that there's an assessment that's needed? Also, the assessment needs to be in the customary environments. When Tasc does assistive technology assessments, it's one of the things that we've struggled with is because it's difficult for us because sometimes the student's in a class only at a certain time or the student is on a field trip. But we want to make sure that assessment is done in a customary environment. Primarily, where is it that they're going to be using that tools? How is it that they're going to use that tool? So it's really important the assessment is as close as possible in that customary or natural environment. The assessment also needs to be completed in a reasonable time limit. So this is something that the IEP teams have set ahead of time. You have it in place, a protocol for that, and that reasonable time limit, so it's not 2 semesters into the school year that they get their assessment, because we need to be able to implement that, and we don't want to lose that time for teaching. And finally, with an assessment, you also have to document the recommendations. Very similar to considerations, you could put it in the student profile page, you could put it in the service page, but you want to document what is it that the student is using. And I see that we have a quick question. Okay, somebody asked as far as the reasonable time limits. Now, there is not a set time set by the state that tells us that we have to have the assessment done within 30 days, like when a student is initially referred for an IEP process, but we do want to remember that if a student cannot access the curriculum, so let's say the student has a physical impairment and they can't hold a textbook. Well, if they can't access their curriculum, they're losing time, and the school could be responsible for compensatory education. And no school wants to have to pay for extended school year or private tutoring as part of an IEP settlement. So we want to make sure we're doing due diligence to be as reasonable time limits. Now, I do want to tell you a trick. These are all considerations and assessments. These points are not things that I've come up with. These are from QUIET, which is the Quality Indicators of Assistive Technology, and I briefly want to show you that website. This is a great website to get lots of information, and it's quiet.org, and then it'll redirect you to this page, but just quiet, QIAT.org, and this will provide you some quality indicators of assistive technology. And they walk you through the process as far as consideration, an assessment, and then several other areas of assistive technology. If you're working with an AT team trying to establish one in the school or improve your services, this is where you need to go to really monitor yourself. And the way these quality indicators have been written is AT specialists throughout the country get together occasionally and work on these documents. It may be at a conference. It may be virtually through webinars. It's an amazing process because I've gotten a chance to participate with it, to really sit down and talk about what is it that AT needs to look like, what is best practices, and it really gives you goals to strive to improve your programs. So this is QUIET, the Quality Indicators of Assistive Technology, and they also have a listserv, and this is a great way to learn more information about assessment process, or if you're doing an assistive technology assessment and you run across a problem and you don't know what to recommend, this is a great way to get information because AT professionals, again, throughout the country share emails and ask questions and professionals answer them. So it's a great way to learn information. So if you're not a member of QUIET, I would encourage you to sign up for that as well. You can do the list either daily or they'll send you an email list weekly, so you can do it however you are. All right, are there any questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and hop into some different assessment models then. Oh, before I do that, this is one of my favorite sheets. This is called the Assistive Technology Consideration Wheel. It's done by CEC, the Council for Exceptional Children. They cost anywhere from $6 to $8 to purchase, but it's really something that I think every IEP team should be using. This wheel is wonderful because it has different categories of learning that may be a concern for a student, whether it's reading or learning or math, communication. And then you just line it up into the window, and then it lists assistive technology solutions from lower tech to higher tech. So kind of least restrictive to more restrictive. So very simple and very easy to do. Sometimes when parents, I've found during IEP meetings, when you're doing that AT consideration and you're saying, well, what do we think the student may need as far as assistive technology, they just want whatever their student can have access to. They want what's best for their student, which I understand that, but they need to help us as the IEP team as well understand, well, where's your biggest concerns? So with this assistive technology wheel, you would just say, if the parent said, well, I'm concerned with reading skills, you would just move the wheel to reading, and then you can see some suggestions as far as what type of technology may assist with the reading. So it's very simple and very helpful, and it really helps narrow down that consideration. So because the idea of consideration can be a little bit overwhelming as far as what does it look like. Pull out the assistive technology wheel, give it a spin, line it up, and then you'll find those tools that could help. All right, so let's begin talking a little bit about certain types of assistive technology assessments. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Sett Framework, and it's created by Joy Zabella. This is the framework that Tasc frequently uses when we do our AT assessments. It's a framework, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means. It's a framework because it's a structure. It's not multiple choice questions or any kind of form like that, but it's a structure to help you with your assistive technology assessments. The most important thing is of structure, it's built on a good foundation, meaning that the individuals who are completing the Sett Framework need to have a good knowledge about learning, about students, and about observing students, as well as about assistive technology. So when they make their recommendations, it's a valid recommendations. Also, I don't know about you, but I've never seen a house or a barn get built with a frame with one person. So it really takes a teamwork when we're working on this framework. So remember, we talked about one of the things with an assessment is you have a team approach to identifying the needs. Well, the same thing with the Sett Framework. You can use the speech therapist, the special ed teacher, the parents. They can all provide information to complete the framework. And it's going to look different for each student, which is really important. That's why we have IEPs, because we want the information to be individualized. The same thing with the Sett Framework. It's going to look a little bit different for each student. Remember, it's not the end product. We've all seen houses that maybe don't get finished and it's just a framework. They're not really houses. They're not functional. No one can live there. It's not until you put the walls and the furniture and all the other things in that house that makes it a livable house. So just because you do the Sett Framework with a student and you have the assessment completed, that's not the end product. That's just the part of it. And then one of the key things Joy Zabella does talk about with the Sett Framework is reframing. Remember, we talked about assessment being continuous? Well, that's where when we reframe, we look again at the student to determine, is the AT still meeting their needs or does something need to change? The Sett Framework is an acronym, and the first letter is S for Sett, because we're going to look at the student. What is it about the student that we need to consider for assistive technology? What is their physical, their sensory, their academic performance, their cognitive ability, their communication, social competence, behavior, recreation, leisure, vocational performance? These are all some things to consider. Now, when you go to Joy Zabella's website, you can download her Sett Framework handouts, and these are labeled in different categories, and you can complete the questions. We also have a short 20-minute webinar specifically on the Sett Framework that we go a little more in detail into those different categories as far as what things you may be looking for when you're looking at the student. After you've looked at the student and identified different things about the student, then you look at the environment. So are they in a general education classroom? Are they in a self-contained classroom? Do they change classes? Do they have the technology access at home, which is really important when we're thinking about assistive technology? So the environment is key when we're looking at assistive technology assessments. And then we look at the task, and these are things such as writing. So if they're in first grade, they may just be writing words in short sentences, but they're in 6th or 7th grade, they may be taking notes and essays. So their tasks look different. So we want to make sure we understand, well, what is it the task that they're trying to accomplish that they need help with as far as using assistive technology? And finally, you look at the tools. So based on the student, based on the environment, and based on the task that they're trying to complete, what type of assistive technology tools are needed? Now this is where I'm going to really encourage you. If you can do the first 3 things as an IEP team, look at the student, the environment, and the task, There are organizations such as Tasc that will help you find the tools. YouTube and Google and Pinterest are also great resources to finding those tools. These tools are constantly changing, so it is hard to keep up with knowing what is available. But if you can identify the first three, we'll help you find the tools that'll help the student access their curriculum and utilize those tools. Now, another model for assistive technology assessment is the HAT model, and this is used a lot by AT specialists that have their ATP, the Assistive Technology Practitioner, certification through RESNA, and this one again is broken down into a framework similar to the Sett Framework. First, we're going to look at the human, or remember the Sett, we said the student, as far as their physical abilities, their cognitive abilities, and the emotional abilities. So we always keep the student first. And then we look at the activity, which is similar to the Sett Framework where we looked at the task. The activity, whether it's self-care or productivity or leisure. Now the HAT model is not just for students, it does apply for individuals in like rehab programs or in vocational programs or independent living programs. So that's why these activities are more generic. Now I will use the Sett Framework not just for student activities as well, because I change it from student into the someone. And then you can look at the vocational goals and those life skills. So remember, AT doesn't have to be just classroom. And then we look at the assistive technology after we look at the human and the activity as far as human technology interface, meaning how is that individual going to access the computer or the iPad or the tablet. The processor would be the computer or the iPad or tablet that you're using. And then the activity output is basically what is it that that computer is doing. And then you have the environmental interface. So pretty techy model, the HAT model, and usually we're seeing that used by rehab engineers and counselors. And then all of this has to be considered within the context. Just like we look in the environment for Sett Framework, we're going to look at the context for the human, the activity, and the assistive technology in the HAT model, as far as the physical context, the social context, the cultural context, and the institutional context. You know, this is something that we haven't always addressed when we're looking at students and doing AT assessments, is that social context, because students with disabilities often don't want to seem different than their peers. If everyone in the classroom is using an iPad, that student will be fine using an iPad, but maybe no one else in the classroom is allowed to use their tablets. And so by allowing them to use a tablet because they can need it to access their curriculum, and yes, tablets are great and fun to use, you are now making them different, and that may make them feel different, and they may be embarrassed and don't want to use their technology. So we want to keep that in mind, that what is that social context by using the technology? Are they open to using it, or is it going to make them hesitant to use it because it's going to make them different? Which is kind of neat about the HAT model, that it does clearly identify that importance when we're looking at assessments in order to use that. Now to the big AT assessment. This is probably my favorite assessment to use because it is very comprehensive. And this is called the WATI, the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative, or the ASNAT, the Assessing Students' Needs for Assistive Technology. And I'm going to actually pull this up on our website. The best thing about the WATI is it's absolutely free. So there's no concerns as far as we don't have funding for this. WATI was funded through the Wisconsin Department of Education and lost their funding a couple years ago, but they have made all of this information free. So when you click Supports under the WATI site, that's WATI, WATI.org. You see it says Supports, and then Free Publications, and that's going to take you right here to the ASNAT manual, as well as, like I said, I call it the WATI. And there's different chapters. Now, if you're to pull the manual, you're going to become overwhelmed. It's okay. The nice thing about this assessment is you can do pieces of it. So if you, as the IEP team, during that consideration have said, this student has problems with mathematics, you don't have to do all the sections of this assessment. Strictly go straight into the math section. And I'm going to show you right here what that looks like. So then we can help identify and assess the student's math abilities. Well, is there problems with math reading the math? Especially now with Common Core, where we're having so much being about problem solving and word problems, it may be that the person can add and subtract just fine, but they have a reading problem that makes it hard for them to do math. So the level that the WADI identifies, reading math may be the challenge, because maybe they can't read the words or they can't understand the math facts. What about organizational issues in math? So if they're doing lining up numbers or using number lines, can they visually do it or do they have a hard time? So then you can mark and identify things that they have difficulty with. Writing is a separate category. So then you have another page, we scroll down, and you can talk about the assistive technology tried, and then the strategy used, and finally the summary of abilities. So if we were doing with this as a student, if we had an IEP team, for example, and we determine in the consideration part that this student is struggling with mathematics, and we want to consider assistive technology to see if it's necessary for them to access the curriculum. At that point, we may do an assessment using the WADI, where we'd print these 2 pages out, go into the math class and observe the student. And we may pull the student separate and have them do some math with us one-on-one so we can observe them and say, I see you're having some problems with this and this and this. And then after we do that, the WADI kind of helps us too because it gives us some ideas of assistive technology we could even try. So maybe we haven't thought about using adapted paper or graph paper. So after we initially observe the student, we may go back and take some graph paper and see if that helps them and implement that. And then we can look again and try something different if the graph paper didn't work. Maybe we need to change the size of the graph squares. Maybe we need to change the colors. Maybe we need to have a tactile graph so they can actually feel the line, not just see it. So it really gives you some suggestions. Don't be overwhelmed, because I've worked with school systems that have looked at the WADI and said, oh my, when I download it, it's 100 pages. Yes, it's thorough. And that's the nice thing too about the WADI. It is very thorough and it can really address lots of needs. There'll be no doubt in the parent's mind if you work with the WADI with their child that you have done a due diligence with the assessment and you really have given a lot of thought to what is it that that student needs. So remember, we talked about how the mathematics may be difficult because of the writing. So if you might also want to do the motor aspects of the writing. And again, the form through each section is very similar looking. So once you've done the form for different sections, it's really simple to go through and do it for other sections. So what is the student's current writing abilities? What is their current keyboarding? Can they use the computer for different things? Have we tried some adaptive technology? And so it's a really simple form, and it's just 2 pages. Now, you may have a student that needs multiple sections. Don't try to do it all at one time. It's fine to go ahead and say, you know what, our primary concern at this point is looking at technology to help with reading skills. Then we're going to address some of our other concerns down the road. So you don't have to do all the sections. You don't have to feel like if the student needs multiple sections that you have to do those at one time either. Feel free to space them out, because that'll help you as the evaluator really see a clearer picture of the student, as well as it will also help, because what you may find is when we help one area, it's going to help the other areas. Just like if we helped the math, the component, the handwriting component, the physical aspects of writing, the motor aspects, that may help the math skills, because maybe we introduce a pencil grip that will help with the writing. I hope that's making sense. And again, most importantly, this is a great free resource right here online, and you can download the different sections to get more information on it. Let's see if there's any questions right now. Right. Somebody asked specifically, does it address executive functioning disorder? Many of you have probably heard this come up in IEPs. If you have a student that's gotten a neuropsych evaluation through a private evaluation, they may have gotten a label of having an executive functioning disorder, where maybe they struggle with organizing new information, keeping notes together, and different kind of things. The WADI doesn't necessarily have a section designed for that, but it does have a section for organization. So you may find by doing the organization that it will help. So I'm going to just pull that up just so you can see that. So if you had a student with executive functioning and you knew they had trouble keeping self-management or time management, information management, material management, those are kind of cover right there the key points of executive functioning. So I think that that would help you. If you had a student that had the diagnosis, I would start by doing this page. It's a little bit briefer. And now some of this technology, remember, has changed since they've published this. So this was 2009, but the concept of the technology hasn't changed. So for example, under here you see they may need a visual cue for time. Well, 6 years ago, or 5 years ago, that may have been one of those red clocks. Well, now you may decide to do that on an app or a vibrating timer. So the concept and the description of the tools haven't changed, but the type of specific tools have changed, and that's really where it's important. And it's just fine. I know I've talked about it's important not to just go to your closet and pull out your tool and say, okay, I have this tool, how can my student use this tool? It is fine once you complete that consideration or once you complete the assessment to open your closet and say, okay, I need a tool that does this. Will this tool do this for me? Yes, it will, and try that first with the student. Just because the student needs a tool, there usually doesn't mean there's a specific one. So that's really been a challenge sometimes with assistive technology, especially with the iPads being so popular. Lots of parents want the iPad for their student. Well, we need to identify what is it that iPad needs to be able to do to help that student access their curriculum, and is there alternatives that the school can provide that they already have access to. It's not the school's responsibility to buy the latest and greatest. The school's responsibility is to provide access to the curriculum. Yes, that may include technology tools, and it will, and we're going to always consider it for every single student, but it doesn't have to be the specific, such as the iPad or the or a specific tablet or a specific app. Now, this will also help you when you're writing your IEPs under the section where it talks about the services that the student is receiving, and under Assistive Technology, you don't want to write the specific tool. You're always going to describe the tool. So if you see here the Assistive Technology tried, so things like a checklist, so under tools I would write the student will have access to an electronic checklist, and then I may put in parentheses such as the app. Let's say the app OneNote, for example. So I would clarify, I would list the specific, but I wouldn't say the student will use OneNote, because there may be a better one out there that the student prefers. There may be a free one, an easier one to use. So it's important we're not super specific. I'm going to give you one more example. So if we were talking here and we did a student has trouble accessing maybe a computer and they actually need it to use switches. So here goes how the computer accesses the computer. So maybe we do identify that they're going to use switches. Well, I'm not going to write on the IEP that the student will use a red switch, because if they're using a green switch, you're out of compliance. What I would write on the IEP is the student will activate a switch using their head, or the student will use a capability switch that enables them to access it with their head. So it's a little bit different than saying a red switch. So we want to make sure we describe the function of the tool, not the specific tool as far as labeling it with the name of the software. Before we leave the WADI, I'm going to show you another cheat sheet that WADI has for you. If you scroll down, now there are other things on here. Feel free to explore them as far as like, can I try that? A little book to help understand trying assistive technology, some self-rating things. This AT checklist is very similar to the assistive technology wheel we talked about earlier. They give you some directions on how to use it, but when we scroll down, this now takes each of their categories and provides the tools in those categories. The consideration wheel was also made kind of from this WADI template. So those categories that are on the wheel, such as mobility and communication, here they are in a paper format. So if your school does not have access to the consideration wheels, this may be something you want to include as part of every IEP, where the parent can really help and see what may be available for that student. So when we're looking at reading, for example, of course, the least restrictive would be standard text. So a student does not need anything specialized, but maybe they have a visual impairment. So maybe we need a book that has larger print. Maybe we need an electronic textbook. So it really kind of goes from least restrictive to higher restrictive, more comprehensive down the list. But this little checklist is super easy to use, and it has all the different categories, and it's 2 pages when you print it without the directions. And then, of course, there's some additional information on there with some resources. But that again takes that wheel and puts it in a flat paper format, and that would be great to include as documentation for assistive technology consideration. Or also, if your team is trying to determine if an individual needs to be referred for an assessment, you start here by doing a quality consideration, identifying things that you could try before you call in the assessment. And that's all about the WADI, the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative. Now I'm going to take a minute now and swap over to my iPad. Of course, there is an app for everything, and there is now an app for Assistive Technology Evaluations. It's about $30, between $30 and $40. All right, and it is called AT Eval to Go. And this now lets you do assessments using an app. Now, I've had people ask me, Laura, do you use AT Eval to Go when you complete evaluations? Unfortunately, I don't. We use the Sett Framework, like I said, for most of our assessments, and I've done it for 9 years, so it's very natural for me. That framework is kind of internalized. I have it memorized. I know the questions to ask. I know the things to identify and the things to look for. If you're new to an AT Eval, or if your school is just starting an AT team, this is an easy way to start because it puts everything at your fingertips. And I know that is the hardest thing with school systems, is with AT teams, is how do we have time to do this? Usually you don't have a dedicated staff. Usually you already have a caseload that you're still trying to manage, and this is just one more thing that you're responsible for now. If you're lucky, you may have a day a week to be able to do it. But this kind of makes it easy for you. It puts it all in one spot. Now when you do a new assessment, it gives you some background information as far as the student's grade level, their case manager, all that background information that you may need about a student. And then you can do the file review and the background information. So here, look at the first thing. What is the reason for referral or the statement of the problem? There are many times we've gotten AT assessment referrals where that hasn't been identified. So it's really important that IEP team, when they are considering assistive technology and then they're going to refer that student for an evaluation, to identify what is the primary concern. Is it reading? Is it organizational? Is it math? So make sure you understand that when you're doing the evaluation. Why is it that the student was referred for the evaluation? What is that primary concern with them being able to access their curriculum? And then you can also add targeted domain and goals. And if you'll notice, there's an option for use existing. So this really helps. I don't have any right now, and I'll show you how we can add some to save those. But this will really help you if you're working with maybe a student in 3rd grade and they're all working on extended standards, and you have another 3rd grade student, you could just pull that goal in there right there. And then you just click next and you can keep going to previous ones. So let's say the reason for referral is a student is a poor reader and it's below grade level. And I just type in the infant problem and their targeted domain and goals. So maybe their goal is to be able to, so I would just add one there. And the nice thing too is with autocorrect and spell problems, you don't have to worry about that with using the iPad. Save that and it adds that, and I'll click next. And then a current accommodation. So maybe the student is already getting, and see I clicked use existing. Look at all of these. These are already pre-done into the app. These are not ones that I've added. So this will save you a lot of time. These are the most common accommodations that are being provided to students. So maybe the student has access to a graphic organizer. Maybe they have access to a reading software, and you just collect them. These were not me adding them. These were already here. So there's a huge list which will make your life a lot easier. And I'm all about doing things easier and more efficient. So I just clicked use existing. Now if I need to add a new one, I could also add a new one. I would type it in. So maybe that there is a student peer readers who help with reading on grade level text. And then I would scroll down, notes on recent progress. And then when you go into that classroom or you work one-on-one with the student, then you can put in environmental observations, and then you can look at what's available as far as the present technology that may be in the classroom. Do the students already have access to iPads, or is there computers in the classroom? What do they have at home? And then if you'll notice too, there is the option to add media. So when I click add media, this lets me add an audio recording or a picture. So, which is really helpful. So if you have a student that's struggling maybe with the handwriting, you can snap a picture of the handwriting and show this is what the handwriting looks like. We tried a pencil grip and here's what it looks like after. And you can really compare those. And that goes right into your report when you're finished. Now, when we click on recommended strategies and tools, and then I'll click on reading, use existing, and here's that list again. Now, it's hard for you if you've looked at the WADI before or if you've looked at the consideration wheel. These are the same things. Our AT world is very small and close-knit, and we like to do things efficiently. So we all share information. So what's awesome about this is these are very similar to the WADI. So if you've used the WADI before, you'll have no problems transitioning to this app. And it's just as thorough, and I love that it's all right here at your fingertips. So you can mark what is the things that you're going to consider to try to help with the reading strategies, and you can add more. And then there is a section for important notes. When you're finished, you can preview the report, and we didn't complete very many sections, but it would just bullet that. Then you can save this, or you can export it and change it later. So it's really simple, easy to use. Now, just give me 1 second to refresh the screen. And I'm going to hit back and get out of this assessment. It would save your assessments here. You would input, change their names. You can review the audio, view the report, and edit them. And then down below, there's a tab for settings. Remember we had all that information that we could pull from? Here is where you can add your own. So if your school specifically has access to certain software programs, certain tools, or if you know of your AT lending library within the school, you could add those tools and have them handy when you're doing your report yourselves. So like their computer access, here's some ideas, but maybe you want to add a new one. So we can edit these anytime. So I'm going to add a new one. There's a new website called Essential Accessibility, and it's a free web browser that gives you access to anything on the internet, no matter how you need it. And as you see, I misspelled it, so I'm just going to fix it. And then I'm just going to hit save. And now when I would pull in that section, it'll be there for me. Categories. But this is where it's pulling all that information from. And so if you are an AT team within your school system, it's great to have these already built in your categories, because you're going to see things that are repetitive that come up in most of the reports that are similar. Even if you're a Mac computer school user versus a Windows computers, you know, that would make a difference as far as some of those recommendations. So you can have those all customized in there. Very simple, easy to use, well worth the money if you are new to doing evaluations and you want something portable and on the iPad. Right, so that is the AT Eval to Go app. Trying to see if there's any questions at this time. Someone asked about, can you share information from multiple iPads? So let's say you had 2 or 3 evaluators in your school systems. As far as I know, you cannot. I don't believe it'll let you like mimic the profile. So like if you've added some stuff, you cannot just share it with your colleague to add all those things automatically to theirs. That's Smarty Ears is the developer of that app. They're always open for suggestions. That would be something I would report to the developer that it's important for you to have access to. And another trick too, I like Smarty Ears on my social media like Facebook and Twitter, because sometimes they will put their apps on sale, and that's how you hear about their sales, through the social media. So I'll watch for them. So if that's something your school is considering purchasing but they don't have the funding for it, you may want to wait and follow them on Facebook or Twitter to see if they go on sale. And of course, Black Friday is coming. That's a perfect time to buy our iTunes gift cards. They usually go on sale at different stores for about 20% off. And so if you need iTunes gift cards, you may want to wait till Black Friday. And I use apps to find those discounts too. All right, I'm going to exit this just for one moment, and then we'll pull back up our PowerPoint here. There's just a few more things I want to share with you. So we looked at the AT Eval to Go app. The next thing I want to share with you is the protocol for accommodating reading. This is probably, I think I've already said that I have lots of favorite tools, but this is another one of my favorite tools because it's free, and it's from Don Johnston. And if you just go to Don Johnston's website, you'll see how to download it. And it is called the Protocol for Accommodations in Reading, or we call it PAR. This is great for any student with a reading disability, because this helps you establish the type of tool that would benefit the student. The reason Don Johnston developed this PAR was because he realized that teachers were providing accommodations with no rhyme or reason. Basically saying, the student needs extra time, the student needs less number of questions, the student needs less number of choices, not because they had the research to support that, but just because they felt like it probably would help the student. Well, when Don Johnston designed the protocol, the PAR, he said, well, students that have reading disabilities, If I read the text aloud to him on grade level, can he understand it? If the computer reads it aloud to him, can he understand it? So that's really where it's been helpful. I've downloaded it, and I'm going to briefly show you what it looks like when you download it. Don Johnson has great webinars on how to use his PAR. He recently released an electronic one, so you can do it all online. That one is not free, but that is, if you like the PAR, you may consider and say, this is going to be something really helpful for all of our teachers. Let's go ahead and upgrade to the electronic version. When you download the PAR, you get a manual on how to use it, and then you're also going to get these grade level passages. So for example, here's my grade level passages. So let's say we're working with a 7th grader who has a learning disability. I could open the 7th grade level passages, and they have expository and narrative as well, and I could read one of these stories. Well, if the student is, which is what I'm predicting they have since they have a learning disability, then what grade level is it that they can read at? So then I can reverse and go to a different grade level passage to see what grade level they can independently read at. But I also want to know is, can that student understand when it's read aloud to them? So one of the accommodations a student may be getting is that the teacher reads all tests aloud. Well, that's great if the student can understand grade level content when it's read aloud. So if that 7th grader who has a reading disability, a learning disability, cannot understand text when it's read on at a 7th grade level, then reading it aloud is not helpful. That is not giving them access to their curriculum. So the PAR can help you identify that, okay, here's a 7th grader. When material's read aloud, they can only understand a 5th grade level. So an accommodation of having the test read aloud, a text-to-speech program using the computer is not going to help. We may have to find a modified curriculum where that grade level content is lesser than on current grade level. It's a lot different than just providing access and an accommodation. This is especially important for students with intellectual disabilities, because when a student has an intellectual disability or their IQ is below average, they may not be able to understand on grade level material when it's read aloud by a teacher or by the computer. So providing them an electronic textbook is not going to help. Providing them the audiobook is not going to help. We're going to have to consider other assistive technologies, such as using Google to find an on-grade level material that's simpler to read, using YouTube to find a video that kind of visualizes certain text to help them understand it and gives them a visual base before they try to comprehend more on grade level. So the PAR is great because it just gives you grade level passages on different levels, and then you can really assess to determine would audiobooks or electronic books or reading text aloud really help. Like I said, Don Johnson has great webinars that you can download to take this. This is something that I feel like every student with a learning disability and a reading disability needs to have access to. And you should be completing this as part of your AT consideration and your AT assessment. And because it's free, there's really no excuse. One more tool from Don Johnson I want to share with you is the written productivity profile. Now, unfortunately, this one is not free. There's some copyrighted research in here, and that's why Don Johnson has to charge for it. But it's real simple. I'll show you the price. As of today, 2014, October, it's only $25 to download the ebook, or you can get a district-wide license for about $500. But what's nice about this protocol, very similar to the PAR, is it really identifies the characteristics of writing. Because when I have a teacher tell me, or an IEP team tell me that a student is having trouble writing, I really have to take a step back and say, well, why are they having trouble writing? Is it the mechanics of writing? Is it the organization of their thoughts? Is it getting their thoughts down on paper? And so many people want to jump to say, well, we want to use voice recognition, we want to use Dragon, we want to use Siri on the iPad. Well, those are great tools, but if the student can't organize their thoughts enough to verbally tell me their thoughts, writing using speech recognition is not going to help them. They need to probably use graphic organizers and then move into using voice recognition or speech recognition software. But the writing protocol really does that beautifully, identifies those things. Things such as writing your ABCs, copying sentences, copying a sentence that you hear instead of visually see to see if that helps a student. So it really takes you through that process. There's been a lot of research behind it as far as even how some of our students' thinkings have changed over the years, because such as things like bullet information. Well, we've done such a good job emphasizing writing incomplete sentences, students now have trouble brainstorming with just one words. And that's really where the writing protocol talks about that and talks about how identifying it. It also talks about how to measure typing skills and voice recognition skills as alternatives to handwriting. So it's a very helpful tool. Your OTs may have access to this already, or it may be something that you provide for the OT who may be working on their AT team to do assessments, that they have access to that in order to make good decisions about their writing needs. Just trying to see if there were any other questions. Do I have a software for typing speeds? There are lots of out there, different programs that can assess the typing speed. What I like about the writing protocol is it addresses it a little different. It's not just a matter of copying a sentence that you need, because in the real world that's not what we're asking our students to do. Most of the students who are struggling with writing are struggling with that independent writing where they're coming up with ideas. So if they're giving a prompt and they have to write a paragraph, that's a lot different than just copying. So I may take a typing assessment using a free software like from SenseLang Typing, or on the My Study Bar there's a free typing program. There's Tap Typing on the iPad. I may take an assessment like that just to see if the student understands where the letters are on the keyboard, if they have some 10-finger typing skills. But I also am going to want to measure how well they can write as far as speed when they're coming up with a novel idea, such as if I give them a prompt, what are you going to be for Halloween? I'm going to measure how fast it takes them to type that paragraph that they answer, because that shows me, is it a problem with typing, with handwriting, or is it a problem with organizing their thoughts, getting their thoughts down on paper? So yes, there are typing programs, and again, you want to be careful because we're not always measuring the speed of copying. We want to measure the speed of writing as well. All right, so hopefully what you've seen today, and in your handouts there's lots of other references and resources to pull from as far as assistive technology. But first and foremost, I do want you to remember that assistive technology, and I'm just going to pull back up our STAR training site because that is where you're going to find lots more resources. I do want to remind you that assistive technology has to be considered for all students. An evaluation is not required as part of the IEP process for all students. Now, if the IEP team does a consideration and feels like there is a need for further identifying what assistive technology tools would be needed, then yes, an assistive technology evaluation would be appropriate. But it does not require all students. Only that consideration is required for all students. I also hope that you'll remember that AT is not just a device. So you go to that closet, you see those tools, that's not where we're going to start. We're always going to start about that individual first. What is it that that individual needs to be able to do? What is it about their personalities? What is it about their characteristics? Where are they using these tools? Before we even begin to think about the tools. And I'll tell you, having worked in a demo center where we have lots of fun AT tools, it's very tempting just to go in the closet and say, oh, what can I pull out for this student? Well, no, I have to first think about the student. Also, I hope you'll remember that we're going to match the AT to the need. So it's not about, I have this tool, let me use it. I know I kind of sound like a broken record, but it's really, really important that we consider what is it that that student's trying to do. And finally, assistive technology is not just a checkbox on an IEP form. Many times it's hard because the question at the end of the the IEP process, does the student need extended school year? Does the student need busing? Does the student need assistive technology? So easy to click no on that box, but we want to make sure it's not. We're going to consider it thoroughly. We're going to think about what is it that the student needs to access the curriculum? What is it we may already have access to that would help that student to be better, have access to their curriculum? And then we also have to realize that even if we do an evaluation and we have an evaluation team come in and assess the student and they identify the needs, we're not done. That's not the end point. There is that implementation that has to come through. You know, we have to try the tools, and sometimes a tool may work and we think about it and we have the great characteristics that matches the student needs, but when the student starts to use it, it just isn't the right fit for them. We have to be willing to say, you know what, we're going to try something different. And that's really where I encourage you to, when you're doing these assessments, is to start with the free tools. There's so many great free tools out there. Try a free tool, then you can identify and say, okay, this tool was great because it allowed my student to do this, this, and this, but they couldn't do this. And then we can find a tool that would do that. Utilize demo and loans. utilize the vendors because they'll often do free trials of software, or they'll loan you out their product and you can just mail it back to them after 30 days to see if it meets their needs, because we want to make sure that the technology does. I wish there was an easy AT assessment that just magically gave you all the answers, but the nice thing is there isn't, because all of our students are so unique and different. We want to make sure we look at them as individuals, and we also want to remember that the technology is constantly changing. So we can't just use a form because it would be constantly changing. So there's different assessment models, and I'm not going to say that there's one better than any of the others, but really as a school system, it is important to pick one and adopt that principle and go back to the quality indicators of assistive technology, and make sure your assessment teams are doing these practices, or think about how could we improve our AT assessment practices to improve the assessments that we're providing to students. I do ask you when you're finished to please take a moment and to complete the survey, and that will help us with our grant funding. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask. Just type it in your questions or your chat box and we will try to answer those. And you're welcome to email Tasc, T-A-S-C, at ucphuntsville.org as well if you have additional questions. And remember, STAR Training has another webinar about the Sett Framework that goes more in depth, as well as a very in-depth consideration webinar and some additional topical webinars as far as specific tools that may be available to help your student. Well, thank you for participating, and I'll stick around to answer any questions. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.